King Charles III has wrapped his official visit to Kenya. Prior to his visit, it was highly anticipated that the King would apologise for colonial atrocities. King Charles III's visit focused on ways to deal with climate change, support for creative arts, technology and young people. Joining us is Veli Mbele, Sompisi, political analyst and founder of Motapa Afrocentric Dialogues. Veli, appreciate your time. Now let's talk about the political significance of Prince Charles' acknowledgement of historical wrongs committed by the UK and Kenya during his state visit. So he basically said, yes, we did it. End of story, no apology issued.
Yes, thanks, Brother Hugo. So, depending also on how we understand our history as Africans, because the visit by King Charles, is also something that forces us to reckon and wrestle with our history as Africans. And one of the big problems is that in how we engage with our own history, we do it from the perspective of the very people who've colonized us. And in this case, this is why there was such a huge expectation, that an apology from King Charles, was going to be something meaningful. Now, you must measure the expectation for an apology against what institution King Charles represents and what this institution has done. And again, as in our previous conversation, historical context is always important. And historical context in this case would mean that we would understand that King Charles is the face of a global criminal enterprise, which is referred to as the British monarchy, which is over 1,000 years old and has unleashed untold terror, trauma, and pain across the world, and in particular in the African continent, And that is really what he represents. And if you come in the case of Kenya, Kenya was part and parcel of, the British colonial project of plunder, which was a global project. And remember, at some stage, the British Empire was the biggest empire in the whole of the world, And they determined the lives of almost half of the world's population at some stage. And so if you consider all of that, you will realize how inconsequential a mere apology is, and that we should be seeking for something deeper and for something much more than a simple apology. Because
does a conversation, yes, not start somewhere? And is that point of start not, he's acknowledged and then apologized? So once somebody acknowledges, maybe let's forego the apology and the fact that he's acknowledged that the British did this to the Kenyans in this particular instance, as they did to many other African countries. Is that not a start for where Kenya can now institute a conversation into, okay, you've acknowledged that you've done this, so this is, yes, we did it. Let's talk about reparations.
Again, Brother Hugo, a start for who, Because apology or not, look at where Kenya is today and look at the levels of trauma that Kenyans, especially of the era of the British rule, continue to endure. And how is that apology going to help or undo that trauma? That's what I'm grappling with, And I need us to understand, as African people, that it is important that we seek to do or to seek to achieve something much bigger than an apology. And for me, we need to have a different conversation, because what the apology type conversation does is that it forces us into trying to appeal to the conscience of people who have no conscience, I want to just demonstrate something to you. Knowing what the British have done, King Charles still had the courage and the audacity to set foot in Kenya. And he did this because he knew that nothing was going to happen. He was not going to face arrest. He was not going to, suffer any kind of consequences. Had this been an African monarch or an African leader, they would have been held accountable if they set foot, suppose the situation was the other way around. So this is the other thing that we must just understand, just the mere audacity, to come to Kenya, having done what they have done to the people of Kenya, for which And you see, to what has he acknowledged, right? We must also interrogate that. Let's go and see what exactly has he acknowledged, because to acknowledge, through some kind of a statement, but continue, right, to derive economic and other forms of benefit from the theft, the plunder, right, that they carried out in Kenya and other parts of the world, makes the apology conversation meaningless. And we should have a different conversation, like you sort of suggested, that seeks to enable us as African people to get some kind of fundamental and material outcome out of how we want to engage with the West, Britain and the West in general.
So let's just focus. Let's just focus
Yes.
a little bit. So we've had this acknowledgement to the atrocities that were committed by the British Empire, acknowledged. How can in your view, political leaders in Kenya leverage this acknowledgement for domestic and international political gains? Because obviously they're not a superpower. No African country is. And no African country really has the capacity to turn the screws, if you will, on any one of these superpowers. But how do we then elicit some form of benefit?
Again, my brother, there's absolutely no benefit for people of Kenya or Africa from an apology from the head of a criminal enterprise like the British monarchy. Absolutely none, right? Because unless we elevate our thinking, right, we will then understand that the apology is neither here nor there. What we need to be thinking about is developing the capacity as Kenya and as the African continent to hold, right, both the British and all other people who have stolen from us and committed atrocities, to hold them accountable in such a way that that form of accountability would result in us being, a superpower and having our own right to determine our own destiny, including control of our mineral resources. For instance, a lot of British companies still control the economy in Kenya, their own land, right, especially in the nature reserves. We need to change such things. So one of the things that the leadership of Kenya must do, what President Ruto must do, right, is to take over all the, the businesses or the industries, that are a product of British colonialism and hand those to the people of Kenya, right? That should be the type of conversation that we should be having, not ceremonial, ice cream coated type things about an apology here and there, because what was done to the people of Kenya, and I wish to insist on this, right? What was done to them is unspeakable. What was done to the people of Kenya is unspeakable.
Veli, I'd like a chance to creep in. Now, you're advocating for a radical dealing of this particular situation. So let's go back to the situation around Zimbabwe and land reform, right?
Yes.
Now, the Zimbabwean people forcibly took back their land in many respects, and part of the process of sanctions that were instituted is because of that. And for the last 20-odd years, they've been suffering as a result. So that's 20 years ago. Now, let's talk again about Uganda and AGOA, right? And the benefits that they've enjoyed from AGOA, and the fact that they've, as a sovereign state, have said, well, this is how we feel about LGBTQI plus in our country. This is the legislation that we have instituted. And in a matter of weeks, the United States, via AGOA, has withdrawn that facility, and the Ugandans are crying foul. So what can we do that does not have repercussions? Because I can almost guarantee that if anybody employs the strategy that you were suggesting, that there will be immediate repercussions that many African countries will not be able to deal with immediately.
My brother, there are repercussions now. There's been repercussions for over 500 years. So the issue of repercussions can't become something that should shock or scare us, right? Go and look at the quality of life of our people in Kenya, in Uganda, right? Those are the repercussions that have been there for hundreds of years. So the issue of repercussions again, my brother, doesn't arise. The basic problem that we are struggling with, right, as African people, is that we continue, right, to exist in a context of fear and self-imposed fear that what will, our erstwhile colonizers do or say if we decide to treat ourselves as human beings, right? Now, this is what is referred to as the nervous condition that comes with colonization. So even in thinking about improving our own condition, we continue to agonize over how our erstwhile colonizers would think. And this is, for me, part of the conversation we must have, because we have seen in Burkina Faso, right, through people like Ibrahim Traore, and in Niger, right, that we should consider different methods. And Niger and Burkina Faso have shown us that we need to change the approaches. All the approaches that you sort of like suggesting have been tried before, and they have not worked. Right? We need a totally different engagement with the West, a totally different engagement. And there is nothing that's going to happen without consequences. And like I said, we are already living through the consequences. So there's absolutely nothing that we should be allowing to intimidate us.
So let me get to my final question, and that, given that Prince Charles is head of the Commonwealth, how can the organization play a role in addressing historical legacies and promoting political reconciliation among member states? African states make up a little bit more than a third of Commonwealth countries. Would that be the vehicle to use?
The Commonwealth is, you must also understand, and me and you know, the Commonwealth was not established with Africans in mind or with their interests. So it would be misplaced again for us as Africans to put our destiny or our future in the Commonwealth. We must look at our own institutions and place our faith and the future of our continent in those institutions, right? So we must break with the mindset, my brother, that expects or that seeks to outsource the destiny of our countries and our continent to institutions that were created to keep us in a position of domination and being conquered, right? So we need a radical shift in the mindset across the continent, and it starts with the types of things, that I am suggesting, which we are seeing that the leadership in Niger and in Burkina Faso are experimenting with. That is a difficult conversation, I understand, but if we have any ounce of self-respect, we must think about radical ways of reclaiming our sovereignty as a people.
So how far is Africa from speaking with one voice? So you raise a fair point around Burkina Faso and Niger, and how some of the younger generation of leaders appear to be a little bit more radical than the older statesman type of leadership on the African continent.
I fully agree with you when you say there seems to be this, almost like an intergenerational conflict, because a lot of the older African leaders, right, if truth be told, right, have played the role of being enablers of foreign plunder and the colonization of the continent. And they have ice cream coated this as democratization, and they've used words like, economic development and attracting foreign investment, when all that was been happening is, sophisticated ways of continuing to make sure that as the continent, we remain in change.
Veli, I'm afraid we've run short of time. I certainly would like to have carried on with the conversation, and we'll certainly make time for it on another day. That was political analyst and Mutapa Afrocentric Dialogues founder, Veli Mbele Sompisi.